Hello everyone and welcome back. Let's dive right in today because we are embarking on a really fascinating explainer covering one of the most instantly recognizable brands on the entire planet, the iconic, yet surprisingly complex Campbell Soup Company. If you have ever walked down a grocery store aisle, you absolutely know this brand. But what we're going to unpack today is a story that goes way, way beyond the soup bowl.
Think about it for a second. How exactly did a tiny 1869 New Jersey cannery transform into a global pop art icon, a multi-billion-dollar snack empire, and eventually find itself right at the center of modern corporate controversies? Today we're going to contrast that wholesome, familiar soup can sitting in your pantry right now with the gritty, industrial, and corporate realities that actually built the empire. It's a wild story of brilliant marketing, cutthroat scientific management, intense labor battles, and massive corporate evolution.
Section 1. Creating an American icon.
So to understand the absolute behemoth we see today, we first have to strip away the modern surface layer and trace the brand back to its roots, an 1869 cannery in Camden, New Jersey. This started out as just a humble partnership between a fruit merchant named Joseph Campbell and an icebox maker named Abraham Anderson. And honestly, their branding evolution is pure genius. They didn't actually start with that iconic look we all know. Back in 1898, a company executive was so struck by the carnelian red and crisp white uniforms of the Cornell University football team that he convinced the company to adopt those exact colors. 2 years later, in 1900, they won a bronze medal for excellence at the Paris exhibition, and that medallion, it's literally still right on the front of the can today. This layout became so legendary that in 1962, the artist Andy Warhol chose it as the ultimate symbol of American commercialism, creating those 32 famous pop art canvases. Get this, one of those prints later sold at auction for $11.8 million.
But there is another, much more subtle, psychological layer to their marketing. You know that famous cursive logo? It was actually carefully modeled after founder Joseph Campbell's own signature. Why? Well, the explicit strategy was to make the logo look like a housewife's handwritten recipe card. You have to remember, in that era, processed canned food was still a pretty new, somewhat suspicious concept. So this handwritten style was designed specifically to build trust by mimicking the familiar recipes women traded with one another at the time. Pretty clever, right?
Moving on to Section 2, the Condensed Soup Revolution.
Okay, so we're transitioning now from the shiny marketing to the actual engine of their massive financial success, and it all starts with just $7.50. That was the tiny weekly wage paid to a young guy named John T. Dorrance when he started at the company in 1897. Now, Dorrance wasn't just some regular employee. He was a brilliant chemist with degrees from MIT and Göttingen University in Germany. And for $7.50 a week, he would end up completely revolutionizing the company, and eventually, he'd take it over entirely.
So what did he do? Dorrance executed this incredibly mathematically driven pivot. He looked at a standard can of soup and realized that water was by far the heaviest and most voluminous ingredient. So, by inventing a commercially viable method to extract half the water, he created a condensed soup. This wasn't just a neat culinary trick, it was a total logistical masterpiece. Taking out the water drastically slashed shipping and packaging costs. Suddenly, soup wasn't just a local product, it was a highly profitable mass-market commodity.
But Dorrance didn't stop at chemistry either. He completely re-engineered the business using intense scientific management. I mean, he controlled absolutely everything. He brought in agronomists to develop the perfect tomato seeds. He literally dictated exact fertilizer schedules to the local South Jersey farmers. Inside the factory, he had industrial engineers with stopwatches observing and timing every single worker subtask just to calculate the absolute lowest possible wage for that action. Through this relentless automation and control, this system pumped out an astonishing 10 million cans daily during peak season. 10 million!
Section 3. Battles on the factory floor. Now, we need to shift the narrative here and look at the intense friction created by this relentless pursuit of cheap, fast production. Because you really have to ask yourself, what was the true cost of producing America's favorite food? Those 10 million cans a day didn't just magically appear out of thin air. They were generated in the sweltering, noisy, and often dangerous environments of those Camden factories. Thousands of production workers, including temporary workers and a lot of new arrivals from Puerto Rico, labored for incredibly long hours and very low pay.
Well, that pressure inevitably boiled over into decades of escalating labor actions. In 1934, a totally spontaneous worker strike erupted. The workers just kept fighting for fair wages and better conditions, and they eventually won official union recognition in 1940. Then we see a united strike victory in 1946 across both the Camden and Chicago plants.
However, the balance of power shifted over time. As the company built new, highly automated plants elsewhere, the workers lost some leverage, and a major multi-plant strike in 1968 ultimately ended in failure.
And the conclusion of this factory era is pretty stark. In 1979, the company actually stopped using local South Jersey tomatoes altogether. Instead, they shifted to industrially produced tomato paste trucked in from California. Without the need to be near those local farms, the massive original Camden plants were basically obsolete. In 1991, the iconic plant number 1 was literally imploded. Across the various factory shutdowns of that era, about 2,800 jobs were lost. It left a really profound mark on the local community, even though the corporate headquarters did remain in the city.
Section 4. Growing beyond the soup.
So, how did the company survive the deindustrialization of its original manufacturing base? By aggressively acquiring other brands and transforming into a massive, diversified conglomerate. Honestly, it is overwhelming to realize just how much of the grocery store they actually own today. They bought Pepperidge Farm way back in 1961. They picked up Pace Foods for their salsa in 1995. But look at 2018, a historic, massive $4.87 billion deal, with a B, for the snack company Snyder's-Lance, which gave them brands like Cape Cod potato chips and Snyder's of Hanover. And then in 2023, they acquired Sovos brands for $2.7 billion to expand into premium Italian sauces.
This whole massive expansion basically culminated in September of 2024. After 102 years of operating as the Campbell Soup Company, they officially dropped the word soup from their name. They are now simply the Campbell's Company. It was a critical turning point. It proves that their modern empire is now built far more heavily on snacks and sauces than the namesake product that made them famous in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 5, controversies behind the label.
As they've expanded into this huge global conglomerate, they've had to navigate some fairly messy corporate realities in the 21st century. Navigating modern consumer markets has definitely brought a series of public frictions. For instance, in 2010, when their Canadian subsidiary introduced halal-certified soups, the company actually faced a vocal backlash and boycott calls in the US from anti-Muslim critics. Though, for the record, the company stated it didn't ultimately impact their sales. Then in 2012, they spent $500,000 opposing a California proposition that would have mandated GMO ingredient labeling, though they did eventually change course in 2016 to support labeling. And most recently, in September 2025, the company admitted to multiple violations of the Clean Water Act after it was found that their Napoleon, Ohio plant dumped millions of gallons of waste into the Maumee River over a 6.5-year period.
They've also faced some serious internal cultural frictions. This was really highlighted by a November 2025 lawsuit filed by a former cybersecurity analyst for the company. The suit alleges that the analyst was fired after complaining about a recorded rant by an executive named Martin Bally. According to the claims that were released to the media, Bally allegedly stated in a meeting that Campbell's makes food for poor people and that the executives themselves don't want to eat it because the meat is bioengineered and came from a 3D printer. Now, it's really important to note we are just neutrally explaining the claims presented in the lawsuit here, and it is reported that Bally was subsequently dismissed by the company later that same month.
All of this leaves us with one final, overarching question to ponder. Can the Campbell's Company really maintain its wholesome, nostalgic Americana image while navigating the gritty realities of operating a modern, multi-billion-dollar, mega-corporate snack empire? From its ingenious early roots mimicking handwritten recipe cards, to those intense factory floor battles, to massive modern acquisitions and environmental controversies, it is a truly complex American story. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I hope you're leaving with a much deeper understanding of what's really inside the can. See you next time.